Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Nuance Needed podcast. It's Amanda White here. I'm really excited because I'm interviewing Dr. Jennifer Weber. I found her work on Substack, and a lot of her writing has just kind of blown my mind. She has a PhD in applied behavioral analysis, and she also has a consulting company. She was a teacher for a really long time. She now works at a grad school at Columbia. She essentially studies how teachers' teaching and the systems that influence learning impact our behavior and our thinking and outcomes. So that sounds really probably dense and fancy, but some of the work she's shared that made me be like, I need to talk to her, was she talks about as schools and the literary crisis that's going on and the way schools teach reading is causing students to not learn critical thinking skills. And if you listen to our episode with Matthew Facciani, which highly recommend you go back and listen to that one eventually, though it's not required for this one, we talked a lot about, right, how can we develop better critical thinking skills? How can we be better informed to not fall for misinformation? And what I loved about Jennifer's writing is she said, can we go back even farther and look at how young students and kids are being raised to guess when they're reading, or they're not really reading full books, or they're not taught reading comprehension skills. And when children aren't taught some of these skills in school, of course, then they're going to be really reactive online, or they're not going to have strong capability to question and to think critically about things. And obviously, we know social media and the algorithms are only making it worse. So this conversation is a little academic in the beginning, but it was kind of important to lay the foundation. So hopefully you all still enjoy it and you get something out of it. I just thought it was so fascinating if we're looking at critical thinking as this thing that is really negatively impacting our mental health because we're falling for misinformation more and we're losing our ability to question our experience even maybe. And we know people are more likely to fall for misinformation and conspiracy theories when they don't have good critical thinking. It's easier to just do the exact opposite and instead of think critically, just think everything is a scam and everything is wrong. I love the phrase, everything looks like a conspiracy theory when you don't have a lot of knowledge of things. That's kind of the whole topic of this podcast that we circle around. We talk about the impact on mental health. And Jennifer talks about, if you're a parent, things you can do to support your kids in learning better critical thinking skills, and just you as a person, some unique ways that aren't just like read about someone else's perspective, different ways that you can actually develop skills to be more of a critical thinker. So I hope you enjoy this episode. As always, your support means more than you know. We'd love to have you over on Substack if you'd like to join us at nuanceneeded.substack.com. We have a lot of bonus content over there. We have a great episode on cringe culture, and we typically do 1 to 2 bonus episodes a month. All right, enjoy. All right. Hi, Dr. Jennifer Weber. Welcome to the Nuance Needed podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited you're here. I found you on Substack and have quickly become a very big fan of your writing. I just think you have such a unique viewpoint. Your background is you started in special education and now you work with school districts, which sounds a little off probably from what the Nuance Needed podcast is because we talk about mental health, but you actually talk a lot about the connection between critical thinking, emotional resilience, and mental health, and actually how it starts in schools, which totally blew my mind. So how did you get into this work? How did you start discovering these connections?
Growing up, I always wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And I got into teaching, and then I really got into the field of behavior analysis. And then I became very focused on how children learn and the behaviors involved with all of that, really focusing on an analysis of that, which then kind of led me to, once I finished my PhD, focusing on a lot of school consultation. And then just as quickly as our world kind of keeps changing and things are happening, I kind of just started to really apply the science to more of like systems in our society. And so I still do a lot, and I really do believe that there's so much that starts at the schools that are really missed in the education systems these days. But then some of what I've been diving into more recently and what I'm plan to continue diving into is also looking at just
Yeah.
adults. Our world is so different with how we learn, how we get our information now. And so I really became interested in looking at the behavioral science for that too, because what adults model is also going to be and influence the next generation of children as well.
It's so interesting. For people who don't know, what is behavioral analysis and research? Like, what did you actually study?
So I studied really the why people behave the way that they do. We always say it's often to avoid something or to get
Yeah.
something. And every behavior that we see and everything that we do is a behavior. And
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people miss. I do a lot of work with just critical thinking, and that in itself is also a behavior. So it's not just behavior. A lot of people just think, oh, it's hitting or kicking or something like that, but like everything is behavior. Thinking is behavior, reading, all of that is behavior. So it's really analyzing the why individuals
Mhm.
behave and then looking at that in relation to the environment. I started really doing that to change the environment for children and really change and be able to put interventions in for children. But those same principles of what increases our own behavior or decreases our own behavior really applies to adults, applies to us, how we function in society as well.
Yeah. I know you talk a lot about how, right, we assume schools teach learning and reading and math, right, all of these skills, but your whole big thesis, I think, is that schools also teach us how to think. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So thinking is a behavior. And I think that the schools systems really have an influence on what that looks like. So I know I talk a lot in my Substacks about just reinforcement. What are we reinforcing? Because that's tied to whether we see more of a behavior or whether we see less of a behavior occur. And so one of the things from just the more time I've spent in schools and across a lot of different classrooms and just schools across the nation is that sometimes what we're teaching is we're teaching kids oftentimes to answer something really fast, to comply with certain instructions, and to really just be certain with what you say. And so one of the things and connections that I've been really looking into and focused is, are we reinforcing the wrong things for children? So if we're just reinforcing who is going to answer the question
Yeah.
first, what does that look like when we think about thinking? Are children thinking, or are we just teaching them to react in the moment? And so I constantly relate it and think about our world that we live in, this whole digital environment that I think we weren't necessarily all prepared for, but we can get information so quickly on the internet. So the quicker that in schools that we're just basically reinforcing kids for getting something right immediately, as opposed to the kid that takes a minute to really think through the response, question something. I think about how that applies then to the digital world that we're in. And right now, what is often reinforced is what is going to be the strongest reaction we get and how quick can we respond to something. So I do really believe that that does start in the schools, especially with what teachers are really taught to reinforce. And some of that also comes down to they're trying to get through a certain amount of
Right.
curriculum. There's a lot of guidelines. So there's a lot, it's not, I'm not saying it's any one person's fault, but just the way the school systems work, they have to get through X number of curriculum per day in a short amount of time. So I've just been really looking at all of those little things.
Mhm.
How is that really shaping the children that are growing up? And then how are the children that applying that to the digital world? And how are we all applying all of this to society as well?
Yeah, I love that because Sam and I talk and think a lot about algorithms and how that impacts our mental health or social media. Until I started reading your work, I really didn't think about how it started before then. My solution was kind of like, okay, we need to teach people critical thinking skills. We need to teach people misinformation skills. I feel like you know, or maybe you don't know, Matthew Facciani on
Yes.
Substack. Yeah, we had him on the podcast and he talked about pre-bunking information. If anyone's listening and you didn't hear that podcast, go listen to it. It was awesome. But I love how you pull it back even earlier than that. And again, you were never saying that it's teachers' fault, but you talk about the core curriculum. When did that get implemented? If we're looking at this as a timeline, what are some of the big events that happened that you think has then shaped some of these changes?
One major issue that really came to be was that across the nation, the schools began to rely on what they were calling reader writer workshop, which stemmed from Lucy Calkins' work with Teachers College. And it was a whole model. I've done an op-ed on it and some other work with that, but it was really about kind of teaching children to guess and that was okay. You're really teaching children. They might be reading a story. If they don't know what the words are, that model really encouraged guessing instead of explicitly teaching children to read. So that model became incredibly popular. Since about 2022, now a lot of states have started to really put in some laws related to going back to a more explicit instruction type of approach to reading. But up until then, the majority of our nation was really following that. So if we think about it from more of a behavioral reinforcement schedule of it, if we're just kind of being like, oh, you don't know the answer, just guess, that's okay. And we move on. That is how children are then being taught to think instead of asking those hard questions, instead of learning what really thinking looks like. So I do think, and I've written on this, that reader writer workshop model was a huge piece to where society is today, especially children that are growing up today that utilized that model as well. I also think Common Core came in around 2009. So I think that also was a factor too, in terms of they laid out what children should know, but then it led up to the interpretation of just all the different curriculum companies and all these different things of what that actually looks like. There's really just hasn't been this like focus on how do we teach children to think. And while it seems like it's so basic, when the school systems aren't focusing on that in the standards and it's not necessarily being what teachers are evaluated on and all of those things get lost and you start to have, now you've got a lot of kids that are guessing their way and that's been learned, that's been reinforced as being accepted. You've got less kids asking questions. You've got more teachers that are just trying to pull through, get through all of the standards that they need to go through. It's like the perfect storm of now we just have really lost that in the schools.
And when you say we're teaching them how to guess, it's like they're reading and they're sounding out the word without knowing what the word is. And that's fine. Versus, I don't know what the word background means. And let's talk about it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, but it even goes a step further. It's like reading a word. So if you're reading the word cat and you say bag, that model is not correcting you. It's the comprehension side that you were just referring to with the vocabulary, but then it's also the actual physical reading side. Sold a Story is a podcast that did a lot of analysis on it and really dug into this whole model as well. But unfortunately, it taught the wrong behaviors in school because you can't really guess your way through reading words incorrectly because you're never going to make sense of the meaning.
Right. I think back to my own experience. I was never a great standardized test taker. And in the defense, I don't know how we can do standardized tests. Whether we should do them or not is a whole other conversation that we're not going to get into. But it is interesting thinking about, I remember how many years of my life I spent studying for the SATs and the ACTs, and a lot of what you're taught to study is not really congruent with learning. It's read as fast as you can. It is pick up the basic concepts. It's get the gist of it so that you can get through the questions as quickly as possible.
And I think that's really where it's so problematic. And I think years ago, it was the same thing for me. I hated standardized testing. I was never good at it. But it wasn't as a parent when I grew up because you didn't have this level of media or this whole online environment that we have today. And now it's at our fingertips. So it's almost like what kids are learning in school, all of those things that either got reinforced or not reinforced, almost it's too easy to not then generalize that into online behavior and all of those sides.
Can you give me a specific example of what you kind of mean like that so we can paint a picture for listeners?
Yeah. So if we go back to the school example, so we're teaching the kids the first one that raises their hand, gets called on, maybe we're not giving enough just wait time before answering the question. Then all of a sudden those same kids or teenagers or whatever, are going online and they're seeing things in their social media feeds. And now all of a sudden they're reacting almost as quickly as they've been taught to react or respond in the classroom. But now we know that there's the algorithms on social media. So if you take Instagram, for example, or TikTok, you're going to then see more of what you're responding to. So now these kids that really didn't think or really have a process to decipher the information online, now they're just seeing more and more because they were so quick to just respond to what they saw immediately as opposed to breaking it apart. And we know that there's just so much misinformation out there. And then obviously those algorithms are going to just show us more of what we're responding to, more of what we're clicking on. And I just think it's so apparent in the online community now because it's almost too easy.
Can you go into a little bit too about, right? I feel like there was a very prominent article that came out a year or so ago about people talking about how kids are graduating college never having read a book.
Yes.
Can you explain that? Because that blew my mind.
That definitely gets into so many issues of how kids are then getting progressed from grade to grade and all of it. But unfortunately, with the internet and now we've got AI on top of it, it is becoming much easier to get by with those resources. I've dug into this very, very little. It's something I am a little bit more interested in to do in the future. But even like it's almost because of the way our online community is, teachers really need to start to change and the curriculums need to change how they go about asking questions. So they can't just Google the answer and get it. There's got to be something more that there's more analysis constantly in, because right now so many of the WH, who, what, where, when questions that we tend to teachers are taught to ask in school, that's great. But now you can just ask those questions to AI or do a Google search and you're going to get it. So it has become easier to kind of get by. I think there was that article of somebody like suing a school. I got to look it up for like not knowing how to read and kind of getting through the school system.
But it's like, to your point, if we're teaching kids also how to guess and to look like you know what you're saying, to appear confident, to answer quickly, it is going to cause stuff like that. And I think it's so sad that schools and the education department is being like there's so many issues in such a critical time where reading the way you're talking about is more difficult than guessing, which is going to take more mental resources, physical resources from the teachers at a time where we're like defunding them. Teachers are more burned out than ever. It's so heartbreaking how broken the system is.
Yeah, it is so broken. There is so much work that needs to get done. And it's really sad that we have like an entire nation of students, which such a small percentage that really can read proficiently. And I always think that reading is the most important skill that we can teach a child. And I think it's also the most equitable skill we could teach a child, because if an individual can read, then they could eventually then form their own opinions based on reading. I know there's other ways to access information, TikTok now, there's other ways, but really to me, reading will always be the most equitable thing we can do in education. So then children can learn to form their own opinions, get jobs, do everything. But without that, kids are at a major disadvantage. And we're also then not even teaching kids to be able to form their own opinions on critical issues. We're kind of just then teaching them to go along with what they're seeing in their algorithms online, what they're seeing everywhere, without being able to see sources, understand the different sources, and be able to comb through that. And I think we're seeing that a lot on college campuses. We're seeing that a lot with college students and recent grads and all of that already.
Yeah. How do you think reading is connected to mental health?
First of all, I think that reading provides just a lot of opportunities in terms of being able to help yourself.
Yeah.
In a sense, I think that also our online communities, the communities when you don't have reading or you can't read, it's much easier to kind of feed into what society is pushing upon you. But I also think that when you don't know how to decipher information, which is also related to reading and reading comprehension, we live in such an overwhelming time right now, but everything online is so overwhelming. I mean, sometimes I feel like I go to a meeting, I'm offline for 2 hours, and I come back and it's like I'm overwhelmed. And so I think it all plays a role in mental health in terms of what an individual can really access.
Yeah. I think we're entering this age of obviously extreme information overwhelm where it's not even anymore about can you find the answer to this? It's can you dig through the extreme amount of information available? Are you able to decipher, even if we take it out of misinformation, it's like, can you decipher something that's quality? Because a lot of what I work with clients on is not believing everything you think. You're allowed to feel certain emotions, right? Your emotions are valid. How you respond to your emotions are not always valid.
Yep.
And if we want to be able to even think reflectively about ourselves or our thoughts or the environment we're in or whether this is the right relationship for us. And I think no wonder young people are struggling so much. Like I knew that, but hearing you talk about it as like reading in this way is so mind-boggling.
It is a really hard time for individuals growing up because they just have access to so many things. And I do see and I do completely understand why also mental health has become so big and such an issue because everything's just so overwhelming right now. And if you don't really know how you're feeling and being able to analyze that, you're just constantly getting things thrown at you without really being able to do much about it. And I think that causes a lot of people to just shut down.
Yeah. Hi, I hope you're enjoying the episode with Jennifer Weber. I'm just popping in to actually share about our Substack. If you don't know, Sam and I have been putting a lot of effort into our Substack, and we're really focusing on doing a lot of bonus episodes there. And this week, we have a great bonus episode dropping on Thursday. So it may already be Thursday by the time you're listening. But if you've had thoughts and been wondering about Liz Gilbert's book, All the Way to the River, Sam and I unpack that a lot on that episode that's coming up. So if you're interested in that, check us out. Other really great episodes we've done. We have a whole episode on cringe culture. We talk about the pushback to the Let Them Theory episode we did. We talk about when Mormon missionaries come to Sam's house. We talk about our beliefs in space and existentialism. And in 2 weeks, we have another episode coming up all about why is it that Instagram has kind of made us hate our lives. So if you're looking for more, we love having a Substack community over there. Come and join us. We're also running a special through the end of October. Be sure to use the link in this episode show notes, and you can get 40% off a year subscription. All right, back to the episode. I often talk about the sad statistic that most adults only know 5 emotion words. And if you don't have a lot of, it's called emotional granularity, understanding of emotion words and how you feel, that shapes and limits your experience. Because if you don't fully understand what it is to be frustrated instead of angry, you're going to feel angry instead of being able to think critically and maybe identify being frustrated. But yeah, if people don't have the comprehension, don't have the vocabulary, then yes, they don't even have the basic words to even understand.
Exactly. And unfortunately now in just the world that we live in, as quick, like I think about kids today, they're growing up on text
Yeah.
messaging. They're
Yeah.
growing up on having access immediately. So there's no patience. I wrote about this actually the other day. We've lost, what does it mean to be patient? We really have lost all that because we're so conditioned now that everything has to be so quick. There needs to be an answer immediately. And I do think that plays a role too in mental health.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up as well, because a lot of times the takes I kind of see on the internet are, and right, again, the teachers have every right to be horribly frustrated about what's going on. But a lot of times what comes across my algorithm, probably because I'm a parent, is teachers being really upset at parents and being like, you're not raising your child properly and they can't sit in school and they can't do this and they can't do that. And fair, right? Especially I think if we talk about the pandemic, I think thankfully we are starting to recognize a little bit how it's not great to have kids on like technology, and we didn't have all that data, 5 years ago. But I appreciate that we're also talking about this as like a system where everything is reinforcing itself, because as a parent, it can feel just like, I'm trying to do the best I can, but it's also really, I appreciate that you're talking about this as a systemic issue because it makes you realize what you're up against.
Absolutely. And I do really think it is systematic. I've been seeing, I know that there's a lot on the parenting side. There's so many good ideas that are out there, but any idea that goes too far, we end up in one extreme or the other, just like the reading crisis that we're in. We also really are ending up in some major issues with how schools are holding kids accountable, what the backing that teachers have. It is truly all related, and it all comes back to reinforcement. So if a school can't really hold a kid accountable for staying in their seat and sitting down, then that is going to trickle to everything else. So I know there's a lot of people that are saying, oh, it's parenting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely on the boat where like I believe that a lot of it has to do with our environment. And we've got to look at how do we change our environment. So that goes into, okay, how do we set up the school side so we are providing reinforcement for what we want to see. If we want to see students following rules, we need to teach them how to follow rules. And so I'm definitely more in that boat of how can we fix really the systems at large that's playing such a critical role.
Yeah. Yeah. This blew my mind a little bit too. This is kind of the quote that I loved, is you say, when we read, we are both the speaker and the listener. The speaker in us decodes the words. The listener in us interprets, questions, and makes meaning of them. And you have this thought that people are losing the capacity for internal dialogue. Can you tell me more about that?
It's going back to really looking at reading as a behavior,
Mm-hmm.
being able to listen as a behavior, speaking as all behaviors. And really, if we look at just speaking and listening, reading and writing are really just extensions of those things. And so when we start to really lose that dialogue that we're having, kind of the conversation we're having with ourselves, we're losing those critical skills that then also are playing a role in our ability in reading and writing as well. I almost look at like reading and writing as a language, as we're looking at speaking and listening as a language. And the reading and writing is just really extensions of all of that.
Yeah. So for people that are hearing this, and let's say that they're just like relating in terms of patience. I know you did a recent article where you talked about some ways that we can practice patience. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been really big on actually reinforcing the idea of just stopping. As simple as it is, it's that we are in a constant loop. It's a behavioral loop, as I call it, because we see something, and I'm just saying we as like society as a whole, then we respond with a like or a comment to something, and then we're seeing more of that. Mm-hmm. So the algorithms are reinforcing this behavioral loop. I've been into and really focused on we have to break the loop. And it can't be so extreme either, because then nobody's going to do it. But it's really even taking a few second pause before responding, because now we're so conditioned to respond immediately to something. And that goes, I think that applies in the workforce. I know, like with email, I think email's gotten overloaded since the pandemic. And it's kind of, we're on this like automatic cycle. We see something, or we get a message, we have to respond right now. And it's a cycle we just can't break. And that goes to then the news that we're getting contact with, what we're seeing. So one of the things that I think as society, we need to like train ourselves and teach ourselves to do is we need to just stop and just pause.
Yeah.
Because if we can even just pause for a few seconds, that is going to break the automatic cycle that we've really been conditioned to.
Yeah, right. A lot of times, like your initial reaction to something is not actually maybe the best reaction or in line with your values or any of that stuff, but we don't have the time to reflect when we just immediately post or comment and then we're fed something else, or we're just in that loop.
From a behavioral perspective, when we put in interventions, you're not going to change the behavior of an individual by putting in an intensive type of plan that's like not doable. So you always start small and you gradually, we call it shaping, but you just gradually change what you want. So for me, the starting point is adding in that pause. Then maybe then getting yourself to think about a few questions you can ask yourself to start to decipher the information, and then moving on from there. So some people are kind of like, go to the extreme of they're just going to stay off their phone or whatnot. But a lot of those things aren't going to work because they're too extreme. And all of this isn't going away. So when we think about how do we learn to live in this newer environment that we're all in, we've got to kind of take it slow and build that up. And so that's why I have been recommending just being able to pause, then ask yourself a few questions. But it takes time to get there, of course.
Mm-hmm. What are some other things we can do to improve our critical thinking skills?
In the workplace, I really think it's asking more questions. And I think in school, it's asking more questions. I think even in workplaces, it's constantly like, you got to do this. Okay, we're done. You got to find the solution to this right now. It's done. So I think taking the time to ask, how did we get there? What was your thought process? So it's so simple, but it goes a long way, and you can learn a lot about somebody, and you can learn a lot about yourself in terms of how did you solve this? How did you get to this? And that applies in the schools as well. I think applying it on the internet is going to be a lot more challenging, but the more people I think are, I don't want to say skeptical, but the more people are almost as automatic as they are to like something that they've seen before, that they think they agree with, that the algorithm brought them, if they can just stop for like 2 seconds and think about, where did the source come from? Why am I feeling this way by reading this right now? What is the behavior that's being triggered by this? Then I think over time, it will help people just manage the online communities a little bit better.
Do you also feel like the idea of reading, and even like reading fiction and being able to kind of put yourself in someone else's shoes, those are also valuable things we can do?
Yeah, perspective taking. And that's been lost in schools, and there's not enough focus on that. And I think that is so critical. And you're spot on. The more you're reading, the more that you can kind of think about it from somebody else's perspective. That is going to help as well. But to get to that point, I think it's going to take some overhaul of the school systems to go back to prioritizing some of these pieces, because most kids aren't learning that automatically. They're going to learn it by practice and by opportunities to do so. And same with adults as well.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people who like self-help, myself included, sometimes don't love reading fiction. And it is like a good skill and muscle to put yourself in someone else's head a lot of times if you're reading like a first-person narrated book.
Yeah, and I think along with that, we call it like different triggers, essentially. We hear the notifications on our phone. We hear our email pop up. We hear all these things. There's so many interruptions that the attention span has also become really interrupted. So I think along with that, if you're reading, don't say you're going to go read uninterrupted for an hour, because that's probably not realistic if you're sitting with your phone next to you. but try for 10 minutes. Like put your phone on do not disturb just for 10 minutes and get that uninterrupted time, because I think that's another area that you've got Instagram and TikTok that's really taught us. We watch these reels, and then on top of that, I have a hard time just finishing one small task without some notification popping up. And so it's almost also being intentional. You're not going to go from 0 to 100 overnight, but give yourself, like, start small, 10 minutes of uninterrupted time as well.
If any parents are listening, and I'm asking this selfishly also, what advice or thoughts do you have for parents? Obviously, like, not everyone has the resources to get involved in their school or change schools or things like that. But what are some things at home parents can do with their children?
I think, well, reading with your child, huge. I hear this a lot. Kids will be like, oh, school was good, and that's it. Just ask more questions about what was it about school that was good? What did you learn? What did you do in reading? What did you learn in reading? And really, and as you're out and about, if you're going to the park, whatever you may be doing, I think take notice of what's around and let that just spark more conversation. Those conversations are going to lead to developing some of those critical thinking skills. So it of course takes a little bit of time, but I think you could do it while you're doing all the other things across, your dinner table conversation, whatever it may be. I think the more you can really push the questioning as a parent, the more it's going to really benefit that level of critical thinking for a child.
Yeah. Absolutely. You mentioned that you teach students, you teach grad classes. Can you tell me any more about like patterns you're seeing in your own students and how you're combating them maybe?
It is quite an interesting world in academia with that. So I have definitely needed to revamp a lot, rewriting a lot of prompts that I would give my students. So I know that they cannot just plug it into AI and it spit out an answer. So really redeveloping that, really requiring all assignments to have a level of analysis, which is proving to be hard for graduate students, but it's because they haven't had really those experiences. So that's been one big change. And then I will say too, having more discussions. I teach online, so obviously that's trickier, but instead of having discussion boards that you just write down or you write, having more where they have to record themselves talking and really trying to build in more conversations as well. So those are probably the biggest changes that I'm making.
Yeah. I really like that you end a lot of your pieces with hope and like things we can do. And you're not just like nihilist, which a lot of people I think are. Why do you have hope? Or what inspires you that we can adapt through this insane time of change and come out okay?
I think I look at it again from such a behavioral perspective. So it was behaviors, things that were reinforced over time, things that society reinforced that got us to where we are today. So those same things could also be taught in a different way. Obviously, it's going to take people to be motivated by it, but I am hopeful that it's doable, because just as things have changed so much over the years, when we think about it from the behavioral perspective, what's been reinforced, all of that, those things were reinforced.
Yeah.
But now we just need to be intentional on how can we make a better society for future generations, for kids growing up now, and for the future. And so just as easy as it was for where we are today to have a history of reinforcement, then we can collectively together create a new history or build and expand and kind of change past patterns and all of that. It's all teachable.
Yeah.
And that's what really does give me hope.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. I can't recommend your Substack enough. For people who don't know about you, where can they find you? Where can they learn more? I know you're also doing an online course, I think, or you just finished one.
Substack is really the platform that I primarily use. So I'm under Dr. Jennifer Weber on Substack. And then through Substack, I just finished one course, but those recordings people can have access to. And I'm going to launch some other courses in the fall. And then I also co-own a company that's education and behavior consulting and related, and that is www.kitconsult.org.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.